We are so, so excited to see you all tonight. We have a sold-out crowd, plus a few, for our first Tales and Cocktails of 2022, presented, of course, by the Steffee Family. And as always, we are so grateful to David and Laura and Abby for their support of not only this event, but everything we do at the zoo. So thank you. I am the only thing standing between you guys and this truly, truly magical, fantastic story of our gorilla baby. You guys, many of you know I'm a journalist by training, a storyteller. This is going to be a very special night, so I won't keep everybody too long, but I just wanted to thank you all for your support. Many of you are donors, many of you are longtime friends, so thank you for being here, for making today possible. And I will now introduce Dr. Chris Kuhar to get us started.
Hi, everybody. I hope we remember how to do these because it's been a little while since we've had this full house. So thank you all so much for coming back out because we've got some really cool stories to tell. First of all, I just want to thank all of you for coming out. Can you give yourself a round of applause, please? Because I'd like to say that we made it. We're on the other side. It's probably not completely true, but it feels like it in the moment, so let's enjoy that. I also want to thank the Steffee family. Like Sarah said, we really appreciate the support. Thank you all so very much. Because we feel like we have a lot of great stories to tell, and this is a great forum, I think, to tell some of them. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel this evening. First of all, many of you know Dr. Kristin Lucas. She is our Director of Conservation and Science here. If you have been here before, you may have seen Dr. Elena less. Elena is one of our associate animal curators here, and she has a role in our story tonight. And then new to the stage for us is Laura Klutts. Laura is one of our animal keepers in the Primate, Cat, and Aquatics building, and she has a very special relationship with one of our co-stars who will not actually be in the room today. So with that, everybody have a seat, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Although be careful with the water. Apparently that's a trick if you try to pick up the water.
Okay.
You'll understand what that is later. So I'm going to start with Kristen. So Kristen, you are our Director of Conservation and Science, but you wear a lot of different hats here, right? And one of those hats is not necessarily a job here at the zoo. One of those hats is as the chair of the Gorilla Species Survival Plan. So tell the group here a little bit, because we like our acronyms. If you've been around us for a while, you've heard the acronym SSP. Talk a little bit about what SSPs do, in particular the Gorilla SSP.
Sure. The Gorilla SSP is just one example of how this works. There's many different species survival plans throughout AZA, but in short, we're the group of people that manages the population of gorillas for all of the zoos and aquariums accredited by AZA that take care of gorillas. So each of the zoos delegates a representative, and from that, there's a steering committee, and that group then makes all of the decisions each year about what to do with every single gorilla in the population. So we have meetings, we get to know each of the gorillas really well, we get to know the staff and the needs of the zoo, of each of the zoos, and every year, sometimes 2 years, we go through and say, okay, for this gorilla, this is what is happening for them this year. They're gonna stay where they're at. They don't breed this year. The next gorilla, this one, it's time for this one to move to another zoo, and so, and so on. And we do this for the approximately 350 gorillas through 48 zoos throughout the US, Canada, and Mexico. So it's quite a job. I can't say enough about the teamwork that we see among all of the zoos that participate in the program. And I'm very proud to say that I think the Gorilla SSP is one of the strongest ones because there are so many incredibly dedicated professionals at every level of management.
So I think when people think about breeding animals or breeding gorillas, it's like, you know, when a mommy gorilla loves a daddy gorilla very much, you know, but it's so much more complicated than that, right? There's each species has their own particular natural history. They have particular social groups. Yeah. One of those social groups that gorillas form naturally is an all-male group. We sort of shorthand refer to them as bachelor groups. Yeah. Talk a little bit about bachelor groups, because we've sort of been a bachelor group institution for a long time.
Right. Well, if you think about it, gorillas, you know, when they're born, there's generally an even sex ratio. So the same number of male babies are born each year, for the most part, as female babies. But the natural social structure for gorillas is one male, multiple females, and their offspring. So those, you know, and this is one of the reasons that you see that sexual dimorphism between males and females, because in the wild, male gorillas compete with one another for access to a group of females. And so over time, you know, the strongest ones are successful, and so you have these really, you know, good-looking silverbacks that end up becoming, you know, in charge of groups. But what happens to the gorillas that don't end up, you know, having access to females? And that's a huge part of what we do as part of the gorilla species survival plan, is we try to plan for every male gorilla. The minute a male gorilla is born, we are looking ahead to say, how can we plan for this individual's social, you know, life from this point forward? So what we've done, and this occurs in nature as well, but we assemble bachelor groups. And so we've learned through many years of research that if you introduce male gorillas at a younger age, then they can develop really great social relationships as kids. They become friends, and they can, you know, work very, very well for long periods of time. There's a period of time between 12 and 18 where their testosterone is through the roof, and it gets a little more challenging to manage. But after that, it settles out, and bachelor groups can be cohesive groups for long periods of time. So we had a source of pride here at Cleveland Metroparks Zoo, because we had one of the longest lasting bachelor groups in the SSP's history with Beebeck and Makolo before Beebeck passed away.
So two things. If you don't know what a sexy silverback looks like, look into our animal attractions event that we've had in the past. We'll talk about that. Two, the other thing is I just want to mention, because Kristen won't because she's way too humble, but a lot of the work that was done on bachelor groups, a lot of what we know about bachelor groups and how to put them together and how to keep them together, came out of a lot of the research that Kristen and Tara Stawinski started, and I tagged on later. But, you know, really documenting what was happening. So Cleveland really has been a bachelor group institution for a really long time, and that's something that we're very proud of. And then we no longer had a bachelor group because Beebeck passed away, and we were left with Makolo as a male here. So Elena, you've been here for a while as a graduate student, and then now as a curator. Talk a little bit about Makolo, because he's kind of the star of the show in terms of what our gorilla program is, because he's been here the longest. Talk a little bit about Makolo, who he is, and what that means for us as an organization.
Yeah, so I've been fortunate enough to work with Makolo for 17 years, and I've seen him through many stages of his life. When I first started, he was very much a punk in the testosterone phase that Kristen was mentioning. And honestly, I probably was too. I was fresh out of college, and I thought I knew everything that was going to happen. And I think both Makolo and I have been very humbled over the past several years. But I often joke that our gorillas here are some of the most studied gorillas in zoos. We have done so much research, and that has come from really Makolo through so many projects. So we started out studying the bachelor group that Chris and Kristen mentioned. And then as a lot of my graduate work, we looked at diets, and so we really focused on looking at some abnormal behaviors that we see in zoo gorillas that we don't see in the wild. And you know, as a graduate student, I would watch our gorillas. They did a behavior where they would regurgitate their food and eat it again. It's really unpleasant to watch, and it's never been seen in a wild gorilla. And through the work that we collaborated on, we were able to eliminate that behavior in our group and pioneer diets, you know, across the country for gorillas. And so Makolo's been a part of that whole project. We've had recent graduate students looking at oxytocin. So oxytocin is a bonding hormone. And we actually had a graduate student that was able to track Makolo's oxytocin when he was in a bachelor group, when we introduced him to females, and we are trying to send him some samples, I think, now to look at how it's changed now that he has a son. And so that's amazing. That type of work hasn't been done along with many other projects that we've participated in. So he is such an ambassador for his species. We've learned so much from him. So yes, when BBAC passed away, it was a big transition for us. You know, Makolo had been with BBAC for over 20 years. They came here together in 1994. It was really hard. It was a big change for him. I think one of the hardest times in my career was seeing Makolo alone. Gorillas are not meant to be alone. They're social animals. We were training with him every hour, and we really had to work with the SSP and decide what the next steps for Makolo were going to be. So as Kristen mentioned, when they're young, you can form these bachelor groups. They've got to be between about 7 to 10 years old. But Makolo was in his 20s. An adult male is not going to mesh with another adult male gorilla. That's not an option. So it was time for females, and Makolo hadn't seen them in over 20 years. So we weren't exactly sure what to expect. And Frederica, one of our females, was the first female we brought in from Zoo Miami, and that was in 2017. And we also brought in KB, a female from Columbus. And so we had a lot of discussions about how we want to do this, you know, what's the best way to introduce Makolo. We do something in the zoo that's called a howdy introduction. And essentially what it is, you have a mesh panel between two animals, and it gives you a chance to kind of see how they're going to react to each other. And then you can make a decision about how you want to proceed with actually putting them together. If you see a lot of red flags, you might hold on. So we decided that we were going to have both girls together first so that they could kind of pair up and then get introduced to Makolo. And we weren't really sure what to expect. So we started by doing one of those howdies between Frederica and KB, and they were playing with each other, and they just seemed like they wanted to be together. So within about 5 minutes, we put them together. And they were playing, and they were very bonded. So then we tried to do the howdy with Makolo. So he had been outside, we had them inside. We brought him in for the first time. I have never seen him look so large. He came through that door. He was on his tippy hands, I guess. His hair was completely fluffed out. He was on full impression mode. Like he knew what was up and he knew what to do. So we decided to put them all together, and it was a learning curve for him. They would definitely give him a run for his money for a few days until he learned the ropes. They would put their arms over each other and form what we called super gorilla. So the two females would make super gorilla and chase Makolo around. And he would just be exasperated, kind of like, oh my gosh, where's BBAC? I don't know what to do. So it was definitely a learning curve, but he did great. I mean, we were all just so completely impressed with him.
So I think an important part of that is when BBAC passes away, we as an organization had to have a conversation, right? Mm-hmm. You mentioned that Makolo needs to be with girls at this point,
yeah. But
there was nothing to guarantee that he needed to be with girls here, right? We had never had well, it had been a really long time since we had females at our zoo. So, you know, the director in me says, absolutely not, we're not going to be gorilla-less, but the gorilla part of me said that we needed to really do what's best for Makolo. And we made a lot of decisions that relied on our team, right? So, Laura, you're a part of that team, and before you start, I want to acknowledge the rest of the gorilla team who's standing over there. Can we give a round of applause for them? So we now have to make a decision about what to do with Makolo, and Elena described it a little bit. You work with Makolo every day. And you worked with Makolo before the girls got here, around the time the girls got here?
I came right when Tusa, so we added 2 more gorillas after the 2 females that Elena mentioned. So then we got in Anika, and she was from San Francisco Zoo. And then we brought in Tusa. So Tusa's the newest one to the group, and I started pretty much right after Tusa got into the group. So I got to see Makolo learn how to handle all of his lady friends. I know it's a challenge usually for one guy to handle one woman, so he got 4 women. And he hadn't been with a woman since his mother, since he was 7 and came to Cleveland. So I got to witness him learn how to be the peacekeeper, because the silverback gorilla is supposed to keep the peace at all times. He's looking out for every member. So Makolo's still learning his place. You know, we weren't even sure exactly how he was gonna settle in. We were in the middle of all of this when I first started. So it was interesting. The females were working their stuff out as well, but Makolo had the biggest job. And so we monitored him and our altercations, because when we have one of our gorillas, KB, we like to lovingly call her our instigator. she likes to see what she can get away with. So it was also Makolo figuring out how, like, where KB was gonna fit in and who he should discipline and who actually caused the fight and who was just a bystander. So it took him a couple years to kind of come into his role, which he's doing such a phenomenal job. Like, it's impressive even now, the cohesive family group that we have, before even talking about breeding or a baby, but just getting the girls as like a whole social group. It was so interesting to watch Makolo be the rock star that he is. So.
Just for the record, being terrified of females is not unique to gorillas.
Well.
So because this wasn't.
We can all make a
Yeah, super gorilla.
So because this wasn't complicated enough,
yeah.
we made the decision that, well, this is going pretty good. Let's breed. Let's remove the contraception and let's breed our gorillas. So
With an SSP recommendation.
With an SSP recommendation, right? I should point that out. We do work with the SSP for all of our breeding recommendations, but that decision came down, and we didn't have to say yes, right? We could say, no, it's not really a good idea for us in our situation, but we did say yes. So, Elena, talk a little bit about what that means for us, the decisions we have to make and what our preparations look like.
Right, so anytime we plan an animal birth, we typically write a birth plan and think through some of the scenarios. With the gorilla SSP, they actually want to read your birth plan. They're going to read it and edit it and send it back with comments. So I wrote a small master's thesis about how we were going to prepare to have a baby gorilla. It was, complete with Nanika's birth, her history, any prior births she had had, a whole literature search on how gorillas breed in the wild, and then any sort of contingency plans. So we had to think through as a team, obviously, if she raises her baby and it's all smooth, that's great. But what if another female steals her baby? What if she doesn't raise her baby? What if she's raising her baby, but the baby seems weak and the baby's not nursing? We have to flesh out all of those scenarios as much as we can and try to not have those hard conversations in the moment. And so it was a lot of preparation and a lot of planning and thinking through scenarios. And I'll let Laura talk about some of the training, but as I was preparing this document to go out to the gorilla SSP to review, we had this table of maternal behaviors you can train, and there were probably, 20 to 30 on there.
There were 16 for sure ones and probably 20 goal ones.
Okay, so about like 35 total behaviors. And so I sent this around, and the SSP was like, that's great. You'll be lucky to train like 3 of those behaviors. So that's really ambitious and good planning, but good job. Well, we trained them all.
We trained 14.
Okay, well, almost done.
Control. So even before that, like some of this birth planning and these behaviors that we trained happened, like the initial behaviors of like, hey, grab that object and show it to me. If we needed her to pick up the baby and show it to me, this started 2 years prior, looking back into her training record. So we had started training with her, and then we also started training with all of the gorillas. So we started working on, hey, even it's not natural for Makolo to go grab a baby and bring it over, but we're like, maybe if all the females are freaking out, we'll have Makolo know this behavior. So he would go pick up a stuffed animal that we called the baby that eventually worked up to a stuffed gorilla that was donated by our gift shop. And so he would bring it over and he would hold it up to the mesh and he would hold that baby so we could give it a bottle through the mesh, because Makolo weighs 406 pounds, so there's absolutely no way I'm going in there with him in there. I need them to do the work and help us help them in whatever situation we found ourselves in. So we were feeling pretty confident, and we took Nanika off birth control. We had all these behaviors in place, and she got pregnant the first month we took her off birth control. So we're like, okay, so we had a birth window and inactivated our birth plan, and our birth window was supposed to be December 8th through January 12th. So on the morning of October 26th, my coworker, Brian, who is here tonight, and we were separating the gorillas for flu shot training. Every year they get the same flu shot that we get, and our veterinary technicians were on schedule to come up. So we separate them all upstairs, and Nanika will not separate from Makolo. And I was like, something's weird, something's not going right. And at the same time, our maintenance crew was downstairs in their holding doing the last revision of maintenance work we needed for baby prep. Thank goodness. And so Brian was downstairs with them. So she's not separating, and she's not separating, which is so weird. She won't even come over and take her morning medicine, which is like a vitamin and all these other things. And she looks at me, and I climb up on a ladder. And if you guys have seen our inside exhibits, like those back shelf areas, like the concrete work, she comes over and she just pushes down on her belly. And I was like, what is going on? And I was like, Nika, what's wrong? And she reached down and touched her backside and then looked at her fingers, and I was like, okay, what's happening? And she turned around and she was crowning. So I was like, okay. So I walk down front because she's going down front. She's visibly more nervous, you know, not knowing what's going on. And as soon as I get around to the front, out comes baby. So baby's on the ground in the mulch. I radio for Brian because none of us are expecting this. You know, we're like, great, we have one last month. We're gonna get everything set, all these last little loose ends tied up. And so immediately, one of our other building coworkers, our mammal keepers in the building, and I called for him and he came over. So he had eyes on the baby right away, and we were making sure if we saw a breath, if it was breathing. Nanika was not responsive to the baby. The baby was being like kind of pulled around in the mesh because the placenta hadn't come out yet. And I don't know if she was just more in shock or we didn't know what was going on, and she wouldn't separate from the silverback, which now isn't surprising. Makolo is her safety blanket. You know, she feels most secure with him around. So we start enacting some of the maternal training. Of course, then Brian and the other staff are calling Elena and calling senior management and getting everybody on alert that like we have this going on. So we try to do some of her training. She goes over and she'll kind of touch the baby, but she won't pick it up. She's more nervous and looking about where Makolo is. She doesn't, you know, like that's not her priority right now. So then she's going over to be with Makolo, and unfortunately the infant, you know, was just being brought with her and the umbilical cord snapped. And so at that point, at first we could hear the baby crying after we confirmed that it was breathing. So we're like, okay, he's still okay. Like, let's see if she'll pick him up once she like settles down. And when the umbilical cord snapped, he started turning blue and we couldn't hear him anymore. And so she went in another area of the exhibits with Makolo, and Brian and I decided to close the door. And that way we were like, well, he's at least like probably a month early at this point. We don't know if he's responsive. We don't know if he's alive at this point. And so we decided to separate and follow our safety protocols and go in and kind of check him out. So at that point, I think Elena had gotten there. and we go in and he was alive, and he was pretty much all blue and covered in, you know, the substrate that we have in the exhibit and whatnot. So Brian and I were cleaning him off, and by then our vet staff was on their way up too. And he had such a low temperature that I think the first time we tried to get the temperature, it wasn't registering. So probably a couple more minutes, and that was a part in our birth plan that we knew and we were informed about, that these guys can't hold their temperature for very long. So we knew that time was of the essence. And so if we would have waited any longer, I don't know if he would have thrived in the moment like he did, because we were able to get his temperature up and whatnot. So at that point, we're standing back there holding this baby gorilla, and we're talking to Elena, and Kristen's on her way up, and our vet staff is there, and we're trying to get him warmed up, and we never left contact of Nanika and Makolo and the other gorillas. That's very important, so that they knew, like, this is your baby, you know, he's not leaving. We were able to get a weight on him. I think we gave him some fluids, and the veterinary staff did whatever medically that we needed to do. And we would take the baby over for like the gorillas to see, because sometimes the baby started crying again, you know, when we were trying to get a temperature. And Makolo made a vocalization when we run over, like, what are you doing to my baby? Like, so we're like, okay, he's right here. We would go and show him, and Nanika was mouthing him and then would touch him through the mesh. But still, we didn't know if she would have that interest to pick him up. So that's where we landed on the morning of October 26th with this little tiny gorilla. So then we decided in our birth plan, It was to, if he was healthy, if everything was good, to put him back in, do the maternal training, seeing if Nico would pick him up. And none of that really worked, which was fine. And then we decided to put him in there in a nest and put all the gorillas back together. And we had, you know, in our minds, we're like, we're gonna be okay. All of the other females know all the training that we trained with them. So the best thing for him to be is to be with a gorilla if he's healthy. So we're gonna follow that plan. And we put him in there, and within 2 minutes of putting all the females back together so that no one was separated, and the only reason they were separated was for those flu shot trainings. They would have been together any other time. Frederica, our 47-year-old, within 2 minutes of her going in, had him on her belly and picked him up. Yeah, so that was quite an amazing moment for all of us. So, and we are the first institution from day one to have a foster gorilla pick up an infant like that.
Yeah.
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 So we think that the soonest anyone had a foster gorilla on a surrogate is about, what, 15 weeks, somewhere in there?
Yeah.
So from 15 weeks to day one, so much for the plan, right?
Yeah.
You know,
We had a meeting that next Tuesday, actually, that we were gonna finalize all the rest of our plans, so. Yeah.
And then nowhere did it say premature birth.
No.
One area we forgot.
Now we know.
and nowhere did the gorillas read the plan.
Yeah.
So now there's a baby gorilla on a surrogate, right? But there's no mom to nurse the gorilla, right? Mm-hmm. So Laura, talk about what that looks like now in the hours and days that ensue in terms of, okay, he's warm, step one.
Yeah.
He's on a female, step two, he's got to eat, right?
Yep.
So talk about
Step
what that
3.
looks like now.
Yeah. So that was our next goal with our veterinarian. We were like, well, normally he would get colostrum, you know, from the first nursing on mom. So thankfully, we had some orangutan colostrum banked from Kira. Yes.
Because who doesn't have a orangutan colostrum laying around?
I know, right? Like, yeah, they were like, well, we have some of this. And I was like, okay, because when we actually first got the baby gorilla out before we put him back in, Nanika, we trained a nipple behavior, and she did that, and she came over, and we were able actually to do that behavior. And we did have a drip of milk come out from her too, even though she was early, because we're like, we don't even know if Nanika's milk came in. You know, we don't know if this is an option. So with knowing we had the orangutan colostrum, we had a quick little meeting and a discussion. We're like, well, an ape colostrum is better than no colostrum, because that's pretty important for infant development. So we were able to do Freddie's training, ask her to come over, present the baby in such a way, and with like a little baby feeding syringe, we were able to feed him throughout various feedings. I think it was within the first 4 hours, he got 12 mils of Kira's colostrum. And then after that, we already had, per our birth plan, we already had the formula on site. We already had everything that we needed. So we're like, okay, we have all that. We were getting that ready. And then now we're on, I think it was still like every hour and a half to 2 hours, he got fed. Just like a human newborn, all the way around the clock. So we started implementing a schedule. We knew Freddie was cooperative with her training. We were also like completing that training on the fly. But she did so good. Every single time she had to come over, every 2 hours she would come over and sit and do her training. And most of this was for like a sugar-free, watered-down juice, or they get green beans. We don't feed our gorillas hardly any fruit here. Elena talked about the Cleveland diet. So that she did this training every 2 hours was pretty impeccable. Like the first time she brought him over, and Brian and I were able to do the training, and we were able to get him that first food, we were like, okay, like we can do this, like we've got this. And then Nanika also, part of her being the mom, her training was to present her nipple like we checked, and we actually did some hand milking with her. So we were successful hand milking her colostrum, and we were able to collect that. And then we worked to a hand pump, female hand pump, and we were able to get 11 mils of her colostrum and feed that throughout the feedings to the baby. So it's awesome he got all of that he needed, and then we continued to milk Nanika with an electric pump, and no one's been able to do that with gorillas, so the fact that she still participated in that way was awesome. So another really exciting time. But even throughout the night, every 2 hours she would get out of bed. She would come over. She would help us feed him a bottle. And I feel like she knew too because, you know, he would get fussy. And she knew, okay, like she's had multiple kids of her own before, so she knows you feed them and they're content and they go back to sleep. So he got fed every 2 hours for the first like month and a half, I think, yeah. So, and Freddie never didn't come over, yeah. And so that meant like our staff here 24/7, like rotating shifts, and we did like 12-hour shifts on and off, and asking Freddie to do that training. And not only that, but like the group just went through kind of this traumatic birth. And so Makolo as the silverback, like they'll separate in the morning, and he lets us close the doors. You know, we don't do what we want with the gorillas. We do what the gorillas let us do with them. And so at the nighttime, like he didn't want the doors to close. You know, that's not normal for him. So we also were like training Makolo a stationary behavior and training him that it was okay that we'll feed the baby, and this Freddie was letting us do this and all this. So like it was an adjustment for all the gorillas as well as all the staff.
So everything's fine.
Yeah.
Until it's not.
Yeah.
Right? So Elena, you come in one day and it's not fine any longer. Talk a little bit about that.
Right, yeah. So there was one day, and Jen's over there. She was the keeper working the job that day. And she's like, you know, he seems kind of lethargic. And, you know, for anyone that's had a newborn baby, when they sleep, they're out. You know, like I remember with my own kids looking to make sure they're breathing. You know, they're in such a sound sleep. So we're like, well, he could be sleeping. He does sleep really soundly, but he does seem more lethargic. You know, so we had a lot of debate. We had our vet come up, and we had Laura come in, and we're all conference calling, and we're like, we think something's wrong. We think something's wrong. He's not eating. So we made the decision to pull the baby from the group, which is not an easy decision to make, just to have our vet evaluate him. You know, we had to anesthetize Frederica to do that, so it's very stressful. By the time Frederica was anesthetized, we were very concerned. He was very limp, and we were actually not even sure if he was alive. It was very stressful. We finally get him out, and our veterinarian's checking him over, and she's like, you know, his lungs are full of pneumonia. So he's a premature infant, and, you know, so pneumonia is really common in premature infants. And so I guess it wasn't really a surprise after the fact, but he was very sick. So we took him down to the Sarah, Alice, and Steffee Center for Zoological Medicine, which we have a great facility down there, and we have a great ICU room. And so we had him, he was actually hooked up to oxygen tubes and an IV. So he was, you know, you couldn't be really very mobile with him. Our veterinarians were able to determine that he had something called reflex apnea, which I guess is fairly common in premature human infants. And essentially, they get reflux and they stop breathing. And so he would randomly go limp and start to turn blue until you kind of moved him around a little bit, and then eventually he'd start breathing again. And so we raised him down in the intensive care unit room for, how long were we down there?
10 days.
10 days. It felt like,
yeah. November 12th through the 22nd.
It felt like 2 months. It was,
yeah.
You know, and I'll let Laura speak to it too. I can't, you know, we show up on videos and YouTube's talking about the baby, and we're all happy and we're smiling. What we went through in that period, I think, was one of the most traumatic periods for all of us. It's an 87-degree room because it's supposed to be warmer to help the babies regulate their temperature. We knew he had pneumonia, but this is the height of COVID, so we're trying to be extra careful. So we're wearing full Tyvek suit, N95 mask, and a face shield in 87 degrees, so it's claustrophobic. You're holding this tiny 3-pound, if that, baby. He's hooked up to machines. You have to keep him upright so the reflux doesn't make him stop breathing, but he might stop breathing at some point, and you have to radio call the vets all hours of the night. We're switching off every 2 hours and just sleeping in cots in the hallway. It was very intense, and, you know, to be on the other side of it still, I think, is something that, you know, we're all very grateful for.
But you forgot an important part of the outfit.
Well, it did come right after that. Yes. Yeah, And not to mention, too, our veterinary staff slept on the floor in their offices, too, while we were in ICU. So it was like a whole medical team effort.
Yeah.
So, but then once he started making a turn around the corner, and he was like eating well, regulating his temps. He was done, I think at that point, getting his medicine through his IV. So at that point, when we're like, he's gonna be okay, now we have him, we need to think about human-assisted care and how we get him back with the gorillas. So this was made by our education staff.
Christine Cornack.
Yeah.
Excellent season.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember I sent a photo to you a while ago and was like, this is my favorite hand-wearing vest. If we want to have one of these on, you know, standby, which was going to be in our plan for the month that we were supposed to have, but we didn't have. And so within like a day, we gave her photos and she made us like 3 of these. So it was awesome. So it's just a Velcro poncho type thing, and you can put it over your head and you just wear it. And then the strips are supposed to be more like ape hair, gorilla hair, so that when he got his strength back, he could cling on to these strips with his hands and his feet, which is going to be really important because building their strength in their legs and their feet and their arms is really important for infant apes. So, and then we also made our newer versions have Velcro on the arms because we were like, well, Freddie likes to carry him on her arm or on her back. And so we had gorilla sleeves we could attach and have him cling onto our arm. And then when he got stronger down the road, we could put him on our back just like Freddie does. If anybody sees Freddie carry him, that's her favorite way. And she did that with all her babies. And so that was really important for us to have this on the back too. So yes, me and every single one of our mammal keepers lived in one of these, and we're so stylish, but you know what, it was the best. It was the best for the baby and the best to like get him back. Like then our goal switched to getting him back with the group and what that looked like. So
while this is going on in the hospital, Kristen, just talk a little bit about, you know, you're watching the group that's in the exhibit, right? So Makolo and Freddie are all still back in the exhibit. What's happening there while the baby's down in the hospital?
I would love to tell you, but I was in Rwanda.
Yeah.
Elena?
So I can answer. I was down in ICU with Laura, but as our team reported, Makolo was calling for the baby every single day. He's like, where's our baby? Like his role as a silverback is to keep the whole group together, and they're missing a member of their group, and the females were looking for him. And, you know, it was really rough for the group. You know, we don't want to raise, we want animals to be with their birth mothers and with their species. We don't want them to be with us. And that's why we're wearing these vests, and we're trying to, when we can't have him next to the group or with the group, we're trying to mimic being gorillas as much as possible and getting him back up there. So we just needed him to be healthy soon enough to get him back next to that group because we were worried about Makolo's stress levels. His heart rates were registering a little bit higher. Some days we take daily heart rates. Like his stress levels were very high about not knowing where his baby was.
Mm-hmm.
So the priority is then to get the baby back up there, even though he's probably not quite ready to go back. We don't want him to have another relapse with pneumonia. Laura, talk about that process.
Yeah, so at this point, you know, we're really confident in our birth window, and especially then with confirming pneumonia and everything that was kind of like in the realm of him being preterm and preemie, about 6 weeks. So we have this little guy, and as soon as he's ready, you know, we want to get him back up to the building. But then our thoughts are, what are some developmental goals we need him to hit? And then what would have been like his normal birth time? Mm-hmm. So we were in December at this point, and knowing that the like birth window could have been like the beginning of January, you know, that was maybe our goal, was to like, we know he needs to do all these things and we know the group misses him, but what's the best scenario? Should we keep him out for a little bit and make sure he's strong and can like pull up for his bottles and, you know, eat out of the bottle and everything? So after he was cleared medically, on the 22nd of November, we were able to get him back up to our building. And so it was, you know, it was so funny. It was like we always said it was like, I've never experienced this, but it was like taking a baby home from the hospital.
Like, we were like new parents. The vets packed us up.
Yeah,
like,
we had
here's
all
your
this
stuff. And Laura, I'm holding the baby. Laura's like,
yeah. Like we're driving up to the building, like in our veterinary van, and we're like, this is great. He's going home. Like, everybody gets to see him. And so we had him on the vest, and I had Kayembe on me, and we walked down the hallway, and it was a moment, like, where all the adults saw him, and Makolo immediately was vocalizing. He does like a little grumble, like a welcoming grumble. And so when he starts doing that, all the females start doing it. And as soon as they see him, and I'm holding him up, and they all want to come over and touch him, and Makolo like mouthed him, which is a very ape social thing. They're very orally like communicative. And like even his mom, who had showed no interest, was kind of like looking, not coming over, but Freddie wanted to touch him right away. She wanted me to hold his arm up. Like it was amazing to see that. So, and we were able to get a little video of it, and just watching it back still to this day, like, makes me have a moment. So yeah, but it was so cool to like, it's just like they knew he was like okay then. They're like, all right, he's back, we're okay. So at this point, we're still continuing round the clock human care. So that means we're living in our gorilla building with the gorilla suit on, with this baby on us 24/7. You know, he doesn't go in a crib or go in whatever. We're his home, because he would always be with Freddie. And so throughout the day, we would do exactly what Freddie did. We would take him down the ape hallway. We would sit with the gorillas whenever they wanted to come over and see him. Like, we would show him to him. We were doing his bottles, you know, like him holding on to the mesh, because we would act like we were Freddie on one side and holding him up to the mesh, and a keeper, so another one of our staff coming and holding the bottle up through the mesh so he didn't lose that. And then if you guys saw us, we were in the back hallway viewable the whole time, and so you would see us put him on our back, because that's what Freddie does. And we would be walking up and down the hallway whenever Freddie was around foraging or locomoting. We were up foraging and locomoting. So, and also building his muscles, like letting him crawl around, sitting on the ground with him, with the gorilla on the other side of the mesh with us, so they could hear them and smell them, and like they could interact with each other. So, and then we noticed that all of them would come over and sit with us for about 40 minutes. They would take turns, and they would come and sit, especially KB and Freddie and Makolo. And so we were like, you know, this is awesome, and we want them to know they can interact with them without, you know, us being a part of it, because eventually we're not going in there with the gorillas with them. So we set up this little howdy basket. You heard the term howdy before. So it was like a milk crate we could put him in, and we had it hooked to the mesh so the gorillas could come over without us involved and have their social time through the mesh. And so Makolo would even push the girls out of the way and come sit next to him. And sometimes, you know how like babies get those little like dream sleeps, and they move, and so he would do that too. And he would watch him, and when Kayembe started doing that, Moki would vocalize to him and go, like, which was the best thing in the world. And then Freddie would come over when Makolo finally got out of the way. Freddie would come over and just sit there and hang out and like either bring some food or just look at us. And there was this one time, he was getting really strong, and so he was grabbing onto the mesh and crawling up, which is what Freddie is letting him do now. It's what moms would teach them to like be locomoting on their own and whatnot. So I was letting him crawl up on the mesh a little bit. I was there, I was watching him. I'm not the worst babysitter in the world. But like, you know, he's got to learn. When he lets go, he tumbles a little bit, and he had his seat there to catch him, and I was right there. And he let go, and he cried a little. And Freddie just jumped up, and she looked at me and was like, and I remember going back and telling my coworkers, like, I just got judged by Freddie. She was like, what? You need to do a better job with my baby. Like, what? Like, what are you doing? Like, and it was cool because we would hold him up too, and when he would crawl in the mesh, his arms were going through, and we felt comfortable with the gorillas, and they would do like a little bit of play, and you know, the adults would come over and interact, and even Nanika at this point would come over a couple of times. KB was really interested, so we knew like, all right, we didn't lose any social stuff with him needing to recover down at ICU. He's back, we're good. And as long as we were hitting our milestones of like him eating his bottles and interacting with the adults and getting his strength. And then we also nest trained him because he would sleep in the nest. Gorillas make nests every single night. It's like a giant bird nest with either wood wool or straw or leaves or So they make their nest and babies sleep with their mom in the nest. So we were actually doing that at night. We were making a little baby nest and like having him in there with us. And so we were doing that training too, because these are all the things he needs to do to get back with Freddie.
Still with you guys.
Yes.
Right? So there's one major hurdle that needs to be accomplished, and maybe it wasn't so major after all because of all the hard work. Talk about that last step.
Yeah, so we had a date in mind that we were gonna put him back, but then unfortunately COVID spiked in our area. And not only was like some of our staff members, you know, either being exposed or getting COVID, we were like, okay, he's pretty ready. You know, are we more of a risk than him being in with the gorillas? So we had a kind of a last minute meeting and decided we're good. He's healthy, he's got all his training down, let's put him in there. So the last step is to give him back to the gorillas, right? And just close your eyes and cross your fingers and hope that everything you've done was enough. And so it was December 29th, it was a Wednesday, and we prepped, we made a nest for him in the exhibits, and Brian and I went in and put him in the nest on one of his vest pieces, so he was really comfortable. And then we put Makolo and Freddie together and gave them access up to the exhibit. And Freddie comes right in, and she goes right over and she smells him. And this was probably like only a couple minutes, but it felt like a million years while we're just like back there waiting. And Freddie comes in and she looks at him and she's like, okay, like you're good, and then looks at all the food around. And she goes and starts grabbing her food and then goes up and picks him right up. So we're like, okay, like she's got him right back. He's not fussy, like he's great. And then I think in an hour, we had a bottle scheduled, and she came right back over and did her training. And it was so funny because at this point, he didn't have the name Kayembe. We called him Baby G because he was baby gorilla. And when we were hand raising him, you know, like we kept notes on everything, we documented everything. And I don't think the public knows, but he does have an alter ego, and instead of Baby G, he turns into G Baby. And this is when he's fussy and he's screaming, and we can't console him, and we're doing everything that Freddie would do, and we're just like, what's wrong? You know, like he's eaten all the formula he wants, he's not hungry. And so we're like, okay, like he's good with Fred, and then we'll just make note when G Baby comes back. And I can tell you, since he's been back with Freddie, there has been no appearance of G Baby. So Freddie has something magical. Of course, she's a gorilla, and we could never be as awesome as Fred. But that just goes to show, like, I think when we put him in the nest and we locked up the back exhibits, and, you know, like, we had a keeper downstairs letting Freddie and Makolo up, and Brian and I are just in the back of the ape hallway. It was like a moment of just holding your breath. And Kristen, you were there with us, like, because we were trying to get everything documented. And so, yeah, you were filming everything, and it was just kind of a very, like, hold your breath moment and hope for the best. And as soon as Freddie picked him up, like, Brian and I will swear to this day that it was just really humid back there, and we just got some sniffles. But it was, I mean, it was emotional, like, because it was like, we did a good job. You know, like, we did the best, we did the right thing by the gorillas. And as soon as she picked him up, it was like, okay, we can do this again. So that was the next hurdle that we got through.
And I just want to pause here for a second. So at the risk of cutting some onions in this place, you know, I just want to recap for a second, right? So first-time mom, first-time gorilla in this organization, reintroduced the baby on day one, never done before, Orangutan Colostrum, never done before, electric breast pump, never done before, about a pneumonia, ICU during COVID, all the gear, back to the building, reintroduced a second time before anyone else had ever done it before, back to mom's, well, Freddie, surrogate mom, right? And what is proven to be thus far, right? We're not quite to 6 months yet, but what has proven to be a relatively stable social situation. Can we just give this team a round of applause? none of them are ever coming back to a Tails and Cocktail. Okay. So what? so what I want to ask each of you now is, so we did everything we could to come up with a playbook, and then rewrote the playbook probably daily as you guys are going through this. I want each of you to tell me what has surprised you most about this process. We'll start with you.
I don't know if this is what surprised me most, but it is what has given me the most authentic and true gratitude for being here. And it's the support that was around this little baby in concentric circles as far as I can see. So we had, everybody, all of the people that were right next to him doing all this incredible care. We had our veterinary team, the research team. I have to shout out to Andy Kornack, our Director of Animal and Veterinary Programs and Deputy Director. Truly. She led this whole multidisciplinary team to make sure we were all moving in the same direction. To you, Chris, to Brian Zimmerman, everybody who, every step of the way, when we needed resources, we needed help, we needed support, everybody was there. This is an expensive process, and I can tell you from the SSP's perspective, in the beginning when Elena was preparing these birth plans, and SSP members were like, I don't know about this, or what about this? Now we tell them what we're doing, they're like, you guys, you got this. You are rewriting the book for us. But they were all there too for anything we needed. So I feel like that to me has been, such an for this little peanut, this little peanut has brought so many, even to this group today, so many people coming around to be there for him is just extraordinary.
Elena, what about you?
So one thing that was very surprising, that's another thing that we are a first for that I want to mention, is that we had a moment when we were feeding the baby with Fred, and Laura said, wait, there's milk coming from Frederica. We had spontaneous lactation in a 47-year-old female surrogate mother. Yeah. So Freddie is now nursing
and
him.
hadn't had a baby in 19 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
And a hysterectomy and one ovary, yes. And the list goes on and on and on, right?
Yep. So he is now spending about 50-50 nursing and eating formula. So that was shocking. It's happened maybe one other time in a very young female that adopted a baby, but never in a female of Freddie's age, and she's probably the second one to have it ever happen. So that's been amazing. But for me, I think just really how hard it was. We planned so much, and we said, we know if Nanika doesn't raise her baby, we're gonna be here all night, and it's gonna be physically exhausting, but it's emotional. You're still making decisions in the moment, no matter how much you plan. I don't know how many times we all said, let's hop on a Zoom, it's Sunday in the middle, Brian's at his kid's birthday party, and we're like, we want to put the baby back in, come get on a Zoom meeting. And he's like, all right. So it's just like these impromptu meetings and discussions, and it's hard. It's hard, trying to feed a syringe to a baby. Even though Freddie's bringing him over great, you're trying to feed this baby, and Freddie's getting frustrated sometimes, and it was tedious and emotional and a lot of hard conversations. But I never doubted this team for a second. It's a fantastic team. It's, we're all lockstep with each other. We had those good foundations, and I think that we were ready to take on anything. Yeah.
What about you, Laura? No surprises whatsoever, right?
Oh my gosh. So this is the fourth ape baby that unfortunately I've had to help and human assist with, and I have to tell you, I'm the newest one on our team to Cleveland Metroparks Zoo. And I will never want to do it again at another institution, because what we needed and what we have and what we had in place, even the training, like, hey, we should, in 2 years, we might need this. And my boss is like, yes, do it. Yeah, and then we needed it, So it was like, to have that and have the support, and then when, things change daily, hourly. We were like, what now? And then our next shift of team would come in 12 hours, and we'd have a page of here's everything that's changed, here's what's different, we have to adapt now. And just it's unbelievable to be a part of it. And then the thing that surprised me the most, it goes back to the gorillas and Makolo. Like, to have the gorillas that we have and have Makolo now, seeing him be a dad, and how, like, we didn't know how he'd be as a dad, and he is so gentle, he is handling his group so well. Frederica is our fabulous 47-year-old rock star, first-time foster mom. You know, so it's just like the gorillas surprised me. Like, to have the trust bank that the staff and I have with them, and to have them be able to pivot and them trust us. And they're like, oh, we need to do this together. Okay, let's do this together. And that we have that foundation in place. Like, so whatever we need, I feel like we could just accomplish it in any capacity.
So tell the story that you've told me a couple times about when you're trying to feed the baby and Makolo's next.
Makolo comes over, yeah. So Moki likes to take advantage of opportunities where he can just touch his little feet when Freddie's holding him, and so gentle, just pick up his feet. And they were able to capture it on the one media video that we put out. Like, when the first day that he went back and Freddie had him, and he comes over and Fred's like, what are you doing? And he just pokes him on the back and plays with his feet. And now that Kayembe is mobile, he is crawling all around. If you guys haven't been to the zoo to see him, you need to come, because he is like a different little monster running around. So he goes full on force at Moki now, and Makolo just kind of looks back and it looks at his ladies, like, hello, like, and Kai's just crawling over to him like, yes, the big one, like, I want the big one. And Moki the other day just looked at him and was like, he's not stopping, he's still coming at me. And Kai's just staring up at his dad, and Moki just reaches down and pats him on the head, just like, and then grumbles at him, and then Fred's like, oh gosh, and just grabs his leg and pulls him away, like sorry. So it's gonna be so amazing to watch even these next couple months and this next year that the role Makolo is gonna have, and to know that this all started because we had Makolo.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So Kristen, I want to ask you one last question, because when we do this, like, you guys have heard, we talk about, you know, our gorillas are here, our animals are here because we want to communicate a message about conservation and how we can have a positive impact on the world. Through this process, we gave Baby G a name. And so can you talk a little bit about that and what that means, and how that impacts wild gorillas, how what we're doing here as a team actually impacts gorillas in the wild?
Yeah, this is another reason I just feel so proud to be here at this zoo and with the leadership that we have, because there is a real commitment to the mission of not only taking the best care of the animals that we can, but making sure that we are connecting what's happening here with conservation. And you know, I also want to give a huge shout out to our marketing team, because they helped us tell these stories. And when the decision was made to help, you know, or to ask for help in naming the baby, it was such a joy, because not only were the keepers able to think through what some of their favorite, you know, names might be and what types of meanings would be special to them, that people, all of you, or many of you, got to cast a vote for which name that they wanted. And in doing so, it provided funding, and you know, through that, we were able to create this actual connection between his birth and a substantial amount of money for conservation of gorillas in the wild. And the Zoo Society, as, you know, in the heart of all of this, making this work and coordinating all this, it was amazing. And I feel so proud. You know, I work a lot with our field partners, and they ask sometimes, you know, what are zoos doing for conservation? Are they really committed? You know, this, I feel so proud, because yes, not only is this little kid, you know, helping us to tell his story and the story of gorillas, but you do realize, you know, this is one baby. And, you know, in Rwanda each year, they have a Kwita Zina, where they celebrate all of the babies born, the mountain gorillas born. And, you know, maybe 15 were born last year. And there's 15 little Kayembes running around, each with their little stories and their silverback dads and their wonderful moms and aunties. And so, you know, when we can create that connection, it's really special. And we're doing exactly what we have the potential to do for conservation and for wildlife. And it's really amazing.
So I was talking to somebody before we started tonight, and he said, well, I know how the story ends, so I'm excited to hear it told from beginning to end. And I said, we're not done,
I was
right?
like, how does it end?
we're not done, right? This is a process, right? Obviously, we're still supplementing bottles, but there's a bigger part to this story, right? So Kristen talked about our field partners. This summer, the Diane Fosse Gorilla Fund is going to open their Ellen DeGeneres campus. As part of that grand opening, there will be the Cleveland Metroparks Zoo Interpretive Trail in Rwanda supporting gorilla conservation. I hope you heard our announcement a few weeks ago about our plans to build primate forest. Yeah. So we're really excited to have Cross Country Mortgage help us sponsor this, but that's not all we need, right? So we're going to be going into a campaign to raise money for this project. We have an amazing gorilla team. They have done amazing work in a building that was built in the 70s, that was probably designed after a building that was built in the 60s, right? So Elena mentioned it sort of, flippantly that, our facilities team is modifying mesh and we're cutting holes and we're remeshing it because nothing was built to really do the kind of training that we do. I mean, when we started in this profession, nobody was training heart checks. No one was training, this baby surrogate behavior. No one was training any of this stuff. And now it's such a core part of what husbandry is, right? No one was supporting gorilla conservation like organizations are now, like zoos and aquariums are now. So what we hope this to be, what we hope Primate Forest to be, is an exhibit that embraces the husbandry, shows what these amazing teams do to the public, right? It's not happening behind the scenes. We're gonna do it out in front because we're proud of it. It's gonna embrace the conservation messaging that we've talked about, right? It's gonna be a completely new narrative and I think provides a completely different direction for what a zoo can be. I know you wanna see it, so do I. We're not done yet, right? So we're in the process of coming up with those plans. We're gonna be doing a lot with the campaign moving forward. If you have specific questions you wanna ask, come find me afterwards, come find Sarah afterwards, or someone from the Zoo Society. We'd be happy to talk with you. We've got a long way to go. And, and part of that process is taking all of the science and the husbandry and putting it into the exhibit design process. So I'll finish with a little bit of a plug. Our next Tales and Cocktails, the topic is gonna be, how the heck do you design a zoo exhibit? How do you make the decisions to build a zoo exhibit? How do you get into that capital design process? It's a little bit different than building a house or an office building, right? And it's much more complicated. Like everything you heard here today, it's much more complicated than you might imagine, even though we try really hard to not show all those complexities. So stay tuned. There's a lot more to hear. There's a lot more to do. The story's not over. We got plenty of work to do, not just with baby Kayembe, but with the entire gorilla conservation, the entire animal conservation message. So stay tuned, stick with us. We got a lot of great stories to tell. Can you please give a round of applause for this amazing panel? So with that, thank you all very much. We appreciate you coming out. Thanks to the team for everything that they've done and everything they'll continue to do. Have a great night, everyone. It was great to see you all again.